Okay, let's get started, please. Stacy is just coming to the stage here. And this is Stacy Pearson, Vice President for Finance and Administration. Okay. Perfect. And I'd like to remind everybody, please, the handheld mic with questions so the other campuses can hear.
Okay. Didn't wear the right outfit. Is this going to be too loud? Never too loud? Okay. Since it's going to be right here. Well, hello, everybody. Good to see you. I was looking at my presentation from last year and thinking, oh, can I make it a lot more exciting this year?
You know how to do that.
So I'm Stacy Pearson, Vice President for Finance and Administration, Chief Financial Officer, and I am coming at the end of my third year at WSU. So allegedly, I know a little bit more than I have in the last couple of years, but thank you for having me, and I apologize for being a little late. There was a little bit of a snafu. So anyway, let's get on to the fiscal recovery and budget update. I was hoping, as I did last year, to kind of give you an overview of where we are financially, but to tell you the truth, I just got our financial statements yesterday. So that, putting this together for this meeting and then, of course, for our March Regents meeting has been just a meeting with the auditors yesterday and all of that. But here is the good news. You remember this chart, for those of you who've attended before. That was the red bars there is our fund balance, if you will, the reserves at the university. So back in 2013, fiscal year 2013, they were pretty high and then went steadily into deficit after that until 2017. And that's the year I came and said, this deficit is going to be even worse in fiscal year 2017, so we're going to have to do something to get it going in the opposite direction. And that's what we have done. So kudos to the whole university, all the campuses and all of that. This is an overall picture. You heard me, I think you've heard me talk about lumpiness, as in it isn't equal for everybody, but at least the university as a whole has reversed that deficit spending trend. And we set a goal of improving that deficit, which was $30 million operating deficit at the end of fiscal year 17. And the goal that we set was reduce that by $10 million a year for 3 years. We haven't ended fiscal year 20. This is the last year of recovery. But our projections, now that we know what spring enrollments are and all of that, are that we will end in the positive. So it's only $1.2 million positive, but and it's coming down from last year, but there's a good reason for that. Most of our expenditures are in personnel. And so a lot of what you see last year, where you see the large green amount, positions were being recruited, but they hadn't been filled. They weren't on the payroll. And so what we're seeing more of in this next fiscal year is they're on the payroll. Now, I've done some further analysis. I think there's a good possibility we're actually going to end the year better than that. But we're not going to know that until the end of June. Well, past the end of June, we have to close the books out and all of that. But I think the good news is that we've reversed collectively a very negative trend for WSU. So I think that we can feel good about that. And I'll tell you too, it's the colleges really, really hit their targets. We set targets for everybody. Sometimes what it is people say, yeah, I know how to not spend more and all of that, but I think by setting the targets, giving people specific numbers and then monitoring those, even though we have an old financial system that's really difficult to get timely data, I think that helped, just having the plan there. So that's a piece of good news. Let me give you kind of an overview. So I told you about the $30 million operating deficit, and basically that red that you see in fiscal year 13 and 14, that's where a lot of decisions were made to draw down university reserves. So if you look at all the activities that we did, we opened the Everett campus, and not in FY13, but over that time period that we had the deficits. We built a lot of buildings on this campus, digital classroom, art museum, the new parking and transportation when they moved that building over so they could put the art museum in. Those buildings were bonded, but they were bonded without a new revenue source. So the payment on the bonds comes directly from the operating budget. I don't like to do things that way, and so in the future, if we're going to not utilize state funds, we've got to have the funding source to make the bond payments. My point being, that was the culmination of multiple decisions. New medical school, new Vancouver campus, buildings on the Pullman campus, things like that. Done, so many of them done in a short period of time. Oh, and also the new stadium, or the new athletic facilities were part of that too. So the culmination of all of those in such a short time period is really what caused this. And I think I've reviewed that with you before. So that second point about annual overspending resulted in a significant drawdown in our reserve levels, and cumulative deficits appeared in several areas. There are still areas that are in deficit, but they're more manageable, as in I can actually count them. So now they're all getting a special meeting with me to be on a special program to get out of deficit. And for the most part, so athletics has already been on a program, so they're scheduled to come out of deficit in by the end of fiscal year 23. Medical school is actually expected to come out of deficit if we get our next appropriation at the end of fiscal year 22. So those two big ones are on target. Then we have some others that we'll be working with them to do a 2 to 3 year plan to come out of deficit. And what that means is, if you're in operating deficit, we have to get out of that. If you have any deficits in your carry forwards, those also have to be resolved. And then the other big next step is we have to rebuild the central reserves. What are those for? Those are for emergencies, when steam tunnels go down and, you know, utilities go out. This campus has $1.4 billion in deferred maintenance, so we need an emergency fund to be able to fix those things. And then I'd also like to have us have a strategic investment fund. So when we agree that there's new programs that we want to look at starting, that we have the ability for Central to make an investment. When I say Central, I'm talking about a non-departmental, you know, WSU, so with the leadership's approval that if there's a program that we want to partner with a dean or a chancellor or a dean and a chancellor to fund, that we'll have some funds to put into that. So that's the next step of fiscal health, is you have to have healthy central reserves, and then all of the areas have to maintain enough reserves to manage their own emergencies or, you know, other things that come up. So the third bullet was that plan that we came up to stop this overspending for those 3 fiscal years. And so at the end of fiscal year 20, we will finish with what we called the fiscal recovery project. And then we will just go into, get this, an annual budget that we adhere to. We won't be doing target run rates, we'll be doing annual budgeting. And then I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So for FY 2019, which is what our audited financial statements are based on, so that would be ending June 30 of 19. The second year recovery goal was, we exceeded the 17-year recovery goal with a surplus of $7 million. So that was in the second year. And mostly it was controlled expenditures. There are some operating expense increases because we did do salary increases both of those years. mid-year for faculty and staff both years, and then on the fiscal year for civil service. Then revenue from state appropriations to tuition increases and enrollment growth did contribute. So that is also good news, that we are not something that so many more institutions are struggling from. Enrollment declines really haven't hit us at WSU, but we're having a lot of discussions about how to plan for the future around that. And then our overall staffing levels continue to reduce. Now that's helping us with the fiscal recovery, but if our enrollments are increasing, we've obviously got a problem, probably felt by many of you, that at some point in time we have to be able to make investments in hiring faculty and support staffs needed for that, to support that enrollment growth. One thing that we do that may not be very transparent to you, but that, this is a slide I do for the regents to say, we talk to you about run rates and our core budget. That's, how do I say that, insider baseball. Then we give you a comprehensive annual financial report and the numbers don't look the same. Why are those two different? So what you see on this campus more is this core budget, which we have all of our operating funds. It's cash basis, so no adjustments for accrued liabilities and all of that. It's run rate focused. Remember, run rate is revenues and expenses. So when you had a run rate target, you could increase your revenues, or you could reduce your expenses, or you could do both to meet that target. So, and then the 3-year recovery targets were monitored. So we've been through all of that. So on the comprehensive annual financial report, we include all of the funding types. So it's more than just the operating funds. Includes donated funds. So those run rate targets do not include donated funds, 17A funds. It doesn't include that. Then on the annual financial report, we also have full accrual accounting for depreciation and post-employment liabilities, those types of things. All of our assets, liabilities, revenues, net position. And we also use, these are the reports we use to benchmark to our peers, which does fit into Drive to 25, because as we try to become a top 25 public research university, we have to pay attention to a lot of the financial benchmarks as well as research activity and that type of thing. So then this is another report that I give to the regents to just say, so what I just described for you, this is what it looks like here, is core revenues exceeded expenses. So there's a $7 million increase in the line item of cash and investments. And then when you add the other things that they see in the financial statements, you see that we had an overall increase in cash and investments at the end of the fiscal year. Now, it'd be wonderful to say, oh, good, we've got that much more money to spend. It's not how it works. That's just we've improved our financial position. But some of that is borrowed funds that we put in to, say, do the modernization project and that type of thing. But we did improve our financial position. So we have a statement of net position, which in the private world is a balance sheet. What are all your assets and what are all your liabilities? And so we improved our net position from last year by $103 million. That is really good news. You know why? The first 2 times I went to the regents, we had declined our net position. And that just wasn't good news. So this will be the first year that we get to, since I've been here, I should say, and since we started the fiscal recovery, that we'll get to report that. And then on the income statement side, or what we call statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position, we've seen an increase in operating revenues, a very small decrease in expenses, and then the non-operating revenue line minus expenses, that's your appropriation. In the accounting world, they call appropriations non-operating revenues because you didn't earn those by delivering education, you received those from governing entity. I don't really get that, but that's the rules that we have to live by. And so we did improve our net position there. So this just breaks some of that down about tuition and fees. Now, I think I've talked to you also about discounts and waivers because we've increased that amount significantly. And what I was seeing is a 5-year trend that even though our enrollments had increased, we weren't bringing in more net tuition revenues. And those are our operating funds. So our appropriations, when we get new appropriations, they tend to be very targeted. They're salary increases, they're the medical school expenses. They can't just be used anywhere. So it's this growth in net tuition that gives us the ability to do any investments in programs or increase budget. So that's pretty important. So in the last year, we've started looking at what we're doing. A lot of that, most of that increase by far is awarding non-resident waivers. So the Western Undergraduate Exchange waiver is when the students that we award that waiver to pay 150% of resident tuition. So a lot of states and institutions go out and say, well, that's the way to bring in more revenue, because even though you're not getting the full non-tuition price, you're still bringing in more than you are from a resident student. And that can be true, but it has to be managed, because if we increase those waivers by $7 million in 1 year, we better be getting the net return on that that generates additional revenue. So does that make sense? I don't want to get too financially geeky here, but it's really saying if you're going to use those waivers, make sure that you're using them to meet your mission. You know, what type of students are we trying to attract, as well as it should be bringing in extra revenues to help you meet the needs of your resident, particularly undergraduate students, if that makes sense. So those are the types of things. So when the president says, you know, I really want to, I want to look at how we can it's not just cut expenses, right, but drive new revenues. Those are the things that we uncover to say, we should take a look at that. And I'll talk a little more about that later. So if I could give you some just summarized takeaways, we've definitely reversed our deficit spending, trend that we were on, and that we're increasing our cash balances and reserve. And our current annual debt service level, you've heard me talk about that before too, is we did borrow a lot of money, so I would call us a little bit over leveraged. So we've really managed that, and we're repaying our debt. And I think I have a slide in here that says in 10 years we will have paid off about 44 million of that, or we'll be down on that debt by about 40%. What does that mean? It means we'll have the capacity to do some planned borrowing and that usually is what we'll leverage for new facilities or lab remodels or those types of things. And then I just on the fourth bullet there just talked about tuition discounting, and then planning to address the cumulative deficits. Again, everybody when they finish their fiscal year 21 process, if there is a deficit that's either expected for fiscal year 20 or anticipated for 21, they'll be on a special plan for how to reverse those. So I have a couple of slides here. So this is in cash investments, and I guess what I would point out is particularly look at 2015 and 16. So if the red is cash and investments, the light gray is unspent bond proceeds, and the dark gray is donated funds. So you see everything goes down in 2017. But if you look at the recovery, I actually like it better than those preceding years that have even though they have more in the overall total, I think it's a little bit balanced in those unspent bond proceeds. All that means is those are monies that came into the cash that came into the university to build facilities, and until that money is spent on those facilities, that's a balance that sits there. So what this is showing you with that light gray line going down is that we did spend that money to get those facilities up and running. And the trend I really like is the dark gray one, and that is the donated funds. Another project we're working on with the foundation is there's about 71 million in our operating budget that's considered 17A funds or donated funds. Those might be restricted funds, unrestricted funds, just getting a sense of how those are being utilized at the university. Those funds sit out in departments everywhere. And so as the foundation has been getting up and running, they're kind of asking, well, how do we monitor those? How do we ensure gift agreements are being met, scholarships awarded in accordance with gift agreements, monies that are sitting there, how are they being leveraged? That's another project that we're working on. I wanted to give you some of the trend analysis that we do and that we share with the regents. This on cash and investments to total debt. So the red line is WSU. There's gold and silver line, or a gray and silver, or I'm sorry, a gold and gray line that are Moody's medians. Well, what that is for me, that's saying we are rated AA3. So I look at the AA3 and the AA2s. These are this is probably a significant portion of universities across the United States, and I measure us against them. And then the black line is our peers, the peers that we've identified for Drive to 25. So I use these ratios to kind of see how we're doing. And the good news is in 2017, we were well below all of those ratios, and now we've actually moved ahead of some. So it just shows the impact of that financial information that I shared with you when you start comparing it to peers that we will be competing with, as well as just our own fiscal health. That tuition discount percentage I was telling you about, that's just simply waivers. It says desired direction go down. So we made a little slight decrease in that overall, but you can see that our discounting ratio is a lot higher than those others. So in other words, that gives us perspective. It might be, oh, we set a goal that we want to achieve, but how are we looking compared to other institutions that we view as either our peers or top competition? So that gives you a sense of how we follow that. This slide shows our expenses, and so obviously to do the fiscal recovery we had to reduce some spending, which this clearly shows that we did. And again, I know there's an impact there because since 80% of a university's expenditures are in personnel and benefits line, we know that isn't that we stop traveling or buying things. It's probably mostly reflected in our personnel activities, and that has an impact. And then this is operating margin. So I'm proud of that big ugly red line just because it's going in the right direction, and this year it passed zero. So I guess this is a progress, not perfection, but anyway. And not only did it pass zero, but as you can see, our peers and that they're all, institutions across the U.S. are struggling with enrollment issues and other things, like in the state of Oregon, the big pension liabilities and things like that. So, they're seeing some struggles and some declines in their ratios, and we're making some good progress. So this looks like a big spreadsheet, but this is the first all funds budget for WSU that we published this year when we did our budget process for FY20, because we had stopped doing annual budget processes, annual budgeting, and we had never really created, at least that I could find. I went back about 10 years and I asked people who'd been here longer. I even called up a retired budget officer from WSU, and it's just, the focus was on appropriated funds. And so I said, really to do this the way we need to do it, we need to consider all funds. And so we created that budget. Now, this includes the 17A funds, and what you can't do, well, you can if you want to. You can look at the budget and say, oh, well, so really we didn't do so well. That 1.1 million is actually reflective of that chart that I showed you that said we're going to beat our target this year by about 1.2 million. That's what's in there. And then when you add in the 17A funds, I think the first thing is, lot of people look at that and say, oh, well, how are people using those funds, those 17A funds? And we didn't dissect that. That's what I said is our future project, is how those funds are distributed, what they're being used for, how we can better leverage them, especially as matching funds with our operating budget. So I'll stop because I'm going to talk a little more about kind of future things. Any questions?
Any online? Would you ask any online?
Oh, are there any questions online?
I have a question from Vancouver.
Okay.
So you talked about the waivers for students. So as we know, different majors incur different costs of education. And when you're using waivers, are you trying to preferentially offer them to lower cost majors, or do they go uniformly distributed, at which case some of the students that come with a waiver are at net loss to the university?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's exactly what we're trying to delve into to determine how waivers are being utilized and leveraged. So I've worked in a couple of other states, and I know that, for example, at University of Oregon, they would limit the non-resident waivers to majors where they had capacity. So you couldn't get a WUI waiver in a major that was kind of at full capacity. Part of that was to address the state's concerns that you would bring in out-of-state students and give them seats that resident students couldn't get. I don't quite have a sense of how we manage those at each of the campuses. And I'm going to admit to you, the work that we've done has pretty much been focused on Pullman and a little bit on Spokane because that's the data I have access to look at. So as we look at our enrollment management process, we definitely want to talk to the other campuses about how they utilize waivers and if we have some opportunities system-wide. But that's a good question. Other questions before I move on? Oh, okay. How much time do
Yes, I had a question regarding.
Okay.
Okay. Graduate tuition waivers are a really important component of graduate education. Do you anticipate them being more negatively impacted through some of these future processes, or are you going to try to protect some of that?
Well, what I would say about graduate tuition waivers is we can see them, we can see what they are. I've talked to people on campus about how they're utilized. To be very honest, they're not on our radar right now because we need to focus more on the undergraduate non-resident. That's where we had a huge increase in how much we awarded, as well as we want to make sure that we're utilizing those properly. I mean, graduate waivers have been fairly consistent across the years that we've looked at, and maybe next time I come, I'll bring some information on that, or somebody will, that's looking at that, and we can show that because the graduate waivers have been fairly, I wouldn't call them flat, but they haven't really fluctuated a whole lot. But again, that's mission, so we need to focus on how we want to utilize those waivers. Okay, so for fiscal year 21, which starts July 1st, we will no longer track run rates. We've told everybody, you can track them if you want. It's a good exercise to do, but we're just going to build a budget, and people need to spend within their budgets. And as you know, we're working really hard. We're in the last few months of our modernization where we'll bring up our new human resource and financial system. And really what we're trying to do is all of this is supposed to accumulate in, we have a budget, we have a system that can track a budget, and which we can have more real-time data so that you could expect that you could, at some point in time, I'm going to tell you, not in the first few months, but at some point in time, you should be able to look at your grants and see where you are. You should be able to look at any budget that you're responsible for, that type of thing. So when we do a budget process and we can monitor our budget, that's going to be a great thing for WSU, for all of the campuses. But what we're doing for 21 is the allocation is the same as 20. The only new money that will be allocated is that which came in through the appropriations, you know, as we get a handle on how we're doing our budget. If there is new money in there, it's probably going to sit in that central reserve until we decide what we're going to do in the future, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We got a lot of projects going on, systemness, strategic planning, and all of that. Ultimately, I want to build a budget model that supports a strategic plan. But first, I need a budget, and then first we need a strategic plan, and we need to figure out how we want to operate as a system, and some of those big things that are impacted, that the budget impacts and that type of thing. Now, the third bullet. Spending of FY20 carry forward is not authorized until we assess the financial condition after FY20 is closed. So there's a lot of pent-up demand to use carry forward. And something that's really gotten us through this fiscal recovery is that we didn't allow the spending of our reserve balances. And why did we do that? Because we had some big deficits to offset. So when you roll all of that up, when we had medical school deficit, on the academic side and athletics deficit on the auxiliary side, we had those who had money had to not spend it so that we could cover those deficits. And so what I'm telling the campuses and everyone is that even though we are on target to meet our targets and we're in better fiscal position coming into the end of fiscal year 20, until I see where we are, I've got to figure out how we can cover those deficits before we allow some of those expenditures. We also need to establish policies about reserves. Give you an example. Typically, you would say it's good to have a reserve of about 10% of your operating budget. So for WSU, that would be, you know, out of a $1.2 billion operating budget, we want to have $120 million. We have about $100 million, but last year it was about $100 million, but that's where the lumpiness comes in. Some colleges, some campuses have large balances. Central doesn't have much of a balance, and then some have negative balances. So good budget processes is nobody has a deficit, right? And then we can leverage. So you at your college, if you had a large carry forward balance and you had to maintain 10% of that, the goal is you should be able to start spending that additional amount on initiatives, things that you want to, programs you want to start and that type of thing. We just can't do that now. And again, it's just another step in that fiscal recovery that until I see how FY20 ends, we're going to stay the course on that. And then I've already told you about any areas with a deficit. We'll just have a special plan for those. And then we're establishing priorities for I put 22, 23. I keep getting mixed up on these biennial processes. They said, no, it's 21, 23, the next biennial budget process. And you heard our presentation on how we want to do capital, where we identify needs. And then what we do is try to bring all of that together. So it's not just state funding, but it's private funding, it's our campaigns, it's, you know, how do we want to leverage all of the funding sources that we have to fund our needs? So we want to do a similar process for the operating budget, and then that last one, build reserves. So here's where I want to talk a little bit about the future. As we can complete our strategic plan and determine how we will operate as a system, we need to kind of get to that shared understanding of those goals, strategies, and tactics. So I'm going to be really honest. When I came to WSU, I asked a couple of questions about, we have a strategic plan, and that was the one with the 56, was it objectives or goals? I can't. Oh, yeah. That strategic plan, we had the Drive to 25 and we had the grand challenges. And I said, how do these tie together? Are they separate and we're supposed to follow a separate path, or do they all tie into one? And how do they weave together? So, no, I didn't get a good answer on that, but now we're doing a new strategic plan. And as you're aware, we have some task force. I'm calling them task force, but they're working on things around how we want to operate as a system. So I think, and then we've talked about enrollment management and having a comprehensive enrollment management plan that's focused on student success. So how are we going to weave in all of these projects with reports coming out on multi-campus systems, enrollment management, strategic plan? I'd like to see us get to a point that I think we're shooting for this spring that gives us like, I'm looking for one map to work off of so that we can do a budget model off of one map. And I'm sure I'm expressing a frustration that others feel, not a frustration, at individuals, just a frustration of how do we bring all of these together so it can be meaningful and clear and transparent and all of that. And so I think those are things that can enable us. I feel good about the things we're putting in place that says, hey, we've got a budget, we're no longer spending in deficit. We are putting in some fiscal policies to help. But now what about the future? Now, how do we make sure that we've got a process to direct new money at the right things? And I'll say new money as well as reallocated money. So what can areas do on their own to say, we want to invest in this, or we don't think that we're having the same types of or good results in this program. Are we able to leverage some of that funding? And within your own college, not so much a program prioritization process, which I've lived through, and I guess you have too, something called A2P2. And maybe if there's lessons learned from that is how do you build the process where colleges, campuses on their own can assess their programs and decide how they might want to reallocate funds. Because a lot of the fear around those projects were they're going to take all of our money or we're going to cut the budgets out of that. But if there was a sense that it would stay with the program, and I've seen that work very well. We just added it to their budget line item and said, oh, you identified 1.3 million in reallocation, so it goes back, gave it back to the provost to go work with the deans to reallocate it. So we kept the academics with academics and then, the rest of the campus. So that's not the only way to do it. There are other ways, but that's kind of the part I would like to move on to. So we've got a lot of work to do this spring, hopefully to get us to that point. I think that strategic plan gets approved, I can't remember if it's the March or the May meeting with the regents, but as you know, those are high level, and we've got a lot of other, I guess what I'd call more tactical plans that we're trying to work on. And then I would also say a couple of projects that we're also working on internally is helping Spokane set up their new structure budget. So we've got a campus, we've got 3 colleges. We're trying to say, okay, all of these colleges are funded differently. So we're doing the inventory of how their funding works so that we can have the future discussion about, how does it need to work and how does the campus budget work, that type of thing. So that was a way to kind of keep working on projects even though we weren't doing the big overall, like what is our budget model? I mean, there's a lot of people say, oh, we need to get to a budget model. And I say, well, first we need to find out who we want to be and what we want to do and build the funding structure or the model around that, which I know I'm saying it right now going, that sounds grandiose, but it's really where we're trying to go. So hopefully that makes sense. Does that give you the kind of the perspective I have? There's probably more, but do you have any questions? Can't remember if I had other slides. Oh, I had some debt slides, but you might not. Just to show you that we carried a lot of debt. It's now going down. The way our debt is broken out is the highest balances in academic and research facilities, and then it goes to student facilities, and then it goes to athletic facilities, and then it goes to housing and dining. So that's where a lot of that is. So, but we are on the downward slope in 2020, and again, that gives us some future capacity. So that's really all I had. They aren't yet, but they will be, because I just got the financial statements, and I'm going to take them to Cabinet on March 9th, the financials, and then to the Regents on the 13th. Oh, you asked me to cover, where are we in the University Fiscal Health Advisory Council committee meeting? The president appointed that committee 2 years ago, and really we're dealing with a lot of these things. So a lot of the things you see coming that I just reported on are issues that were discussed in that committee. But we have developed a set of recommendations. We're still finalizing and editing those, and the goal is that we were given specific charges there. We've got recommendations within there, and then that needs to be put out for campus comment and input before we finalize those. One of the recommendations in there is that we do develop kind of an executive budget committee that's a formalized committee that we do our annual budget processes with, that we go back to having, budget hearings and identifying needs, things that you might expect in a budget process, as well as developing a budget model. So it's really we're coming out of this period of, difficulty. So now let's just build up these committees and practices and processes that are transparent and inclusive and help us move to the next step.
Any questions?
And I think Jim Peterson is your representative on that.
Jim and Greg Rose.
And Greg, and they have provided wonderful input and a lot of history, so. Okay. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do. Oops. I'm going to put this down.
Okay, so we have quorum. Oh, the flag is up. So I'll call the meeting to order. Agenda item 3, approval of the minutes of February 6th, 2020. Are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, they are approved. Announcements, information items. So a couple of things. The Faculty Senate Executive Officer election information is up. The candidates are Regents Professor Doug Call for Chair-elect and Associate Professor and Parliamentarian in Training for Executive Secretary. Their biographical data is on the web under Senate elections. The ballots will go out February 26th and be collected by no later than March 24th. And we're going to really try to remind and encourage people to do those so we can move on pretty fast. But there are 2 people running for 2 seats. That's what we have. Okay, so now on to my remarks. I want to remind everybody that, oh, sorry.
If you only have 2 people running for 2 spots, why would we have a ballot? Why aren't they acclaimed?
Why aren't they what?
Why aren't they acclaimed? Because if 2 people are running for 2 spots,
By our bylaws,
we have to run a ballot?
take
I was just
vote.
asking because.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to take a vote.
That's all, yeah.
So Gail has given me a note to remind everybody about the reception on February 5th. Is that correct? And for, what was that?
February 5th is done.
Sorry, May 5th. Thank you. May 5th. And I got a couple of responses from faculty Senate members that are not on the Pullman campus asking where funds to travel were coming from. So that has been moved forward. So we talked about the election. So I guess my other remark deals with our former provost, Mitzi Montoya, and the piece that came out in the Whitman County Watch a week ago Tuesday. And we spoke, Senate leadership spoke with President Schultz the following day, and he authorized external investigation and pledged that the results of that investigation would be made public. I put that out in an email on the listserv by that, I think, Friday. And our goal is now to make everything as public as possible, as quickly as possible. And what I can tell you is that there is a external investigator that is being contracted through the AG's office, and the AG at WSU, well, in the state of Washington, the attorneys general, they're employees of the state, not the institution. And our AGs are fantastic. So that investigation and the allegations surrounding those allegations of gender bias will be looked at. I have seen the scope of the investigation, and I think it's valid in terms of what the investigator will look at. And that's what I know right now. And as I know more, I will share it on the listserv with you all, so you know, to keep for complete transparency. There are going to be more emails coming out because there are more FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. So those are going to be there, and we will respond accordingly. I've spoken with Mitzi on several occasions, as have some of you, and we're working within the constraints that we are bound to operate in. Any questions on that? Pamela? Oh, wait, can we get a mic, please?
Thank you. Do you know what the timeline for that investigation is? Is there any sense? I mean, it seems like there might be some relationship between our understanding and the transparency around that investigation and the current provost search.
Mm-hmm. I think we'll know more once the contract is signed with the investigator. That's where we're at right now. I think part of so the question is, what's the timeline? And the timeline is based on the scope and FOIA requests and access for the information. So I can tell you that a lot of the information is gathered or will be gathered and presented to the investigator. So I am hopeful that it's a balance, right? We don't want to rush. We want to have a thorough investigation, but we don't want it to drag on. So I don't have an estimate, I guess.
Hey, Greg, I apologize. Could you move your microphone up a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Your volume's a little low. I apologize for interrupting.
I don't have an estimate. I hope soon.
Just a quick question. I read the Whitman County Watch write-up, and one of the things that, and so did some of my colleagues, and one of the questions that came up is, it seems like there was a performance review done within the first 2 months. Is that correct? And that was the question we had. It seems like there was some performance evaluation done by a consultant, but to at least my knowledge, I've never heard of an administrator, for that matter, or any faculty member that's being reviewed, performance reviewed, so quickly after being hired. Do you have any
Yes, I have
about
information on that. I'm trying to think about what I can say and what I can't say, and I don't think any of this is all contractual stuff with the state of Washington, so it's got to be public domain. So Gene Frankel, who is a consultant for Ideas for Action that was mentioned, and that has been working on strategic planning, and she was also contracted to be a leadership coach. So for Mitzi. And so I'm not sure the scope of what sort of performance evaluations were done in 7 weeks. So that's part of the investigation, I guess, is what's that scope? I mean, there's a lot that we just don't know. I mean, it's known, we just don't know it.
Forgive me if this is stated somewhere there, but are the implications of this, let's say that gender bias is found, are the implications that she would return to provost position then?
I don't think that that's realistic. Although she has offered. But I honestly don't know. I mean, there is a provost search committee. They're looking at candidates. I just don't know what the answer to that is. I know she's on the market, right? And I'm sorry, Charles, I just don't know the answer to that.
Matt Carroll. So a related question. A couple of meetings ago, some senators expressed concern that we're moving ahead with a provost search and the EP29 business, in other words, the authority that the provost will actually have over non-Pullman campuses, has not been resolved. But yet the provost search process seems to be hurtling forward in the absence of that decision making. Has there been any, and that was raised as a concern by a number of senators, do we know any more now than we knew a month or two ago about the relationship between those two processes?
That concern is shared by many of us and has been shared with the search committee chairs, the search firm, and the president and the provost. And Laura is here. She's, Laura Greiner Hill is here. She's vice provost for faculty. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but sorry, I guess I am going to put you on the spot. Help me with this. Vice provost for faculty development and affairs, and a member of the, I can't remember what the name of the committee is because it's too damn long, but the committee that's looking at roles and responsibilities. And I asked about this earlier, there's a report coming out next month that looks at that as I think that we understand it, the idea would be that whoever is selected from, or the provost would converge, that those things would converge sometime soon. But Matt, I mean, I think we all share your concern. And all of, oh wait, Laura has something to say.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to say that I don't think it's realistic that that will be resolved. What I do believe is that the intent is to be transparent with candidates about the process that's going on related to that, and that the incoming, that would be something that the incoming provost would inherit. And I believe that they are intending to use the feedback from this group and then from a specific EP29 group. We're doing roles and responsibilities. I guess they're doing how those roles and responsibilities need to interact. That's EP29. And it seems a very intentional process. So.
And that EP29 committee has not yet been formed. Right.
Greg, I have a question from online from Glenn Duncan. Another important aspect of the Whitman County Watch piece is that the president authorized a consultant contract with someone on the East Coast. He reimbursed first-class airfare and limousine service. What budget did this come out of?
I don't know, Glenn. This is, and again, I'm not sure. We have to be careful of scope, right? I mean, is this a question of budget, or is this a question of potential or allegations of gender bias, or what? I mean, that's part of the scope of the investigation. I think the investigation, as it will line out, will be based on the allegations as outlined in the Whitman County Watch piece. Was there gender bias?
Mike Kahn from the Institute of Biological Chemistry. I just want to thank Craig Parks for doing a very nice analysis of multi-campus systems at other universities that are comparable to us, and to comment, if you haven't read it yet, on Mitzi's response to that, which I thought was very articulate.
And so for those of you that haven't seen it, that's what when I sent out to FactSin listserv, that's the report that Interim Provost Slinker provided me to provide to you all. So that's the study of all multi-campus systems in the United States that are similar to ours and their organizational structure. And I agree that Vice Provost Parks did a fantastic job on that report. It provides context for the email. Any other questions on that?
I'm just curious, and I don't know if you can answer this, would we be having an investigation if that article didn't show up in the Whitman County Watch?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. All I can promise is that as we know more, we will share it. And what I can tell you is that that President Schultz was just, I mean, it was 8:30 at night, and we said, we have to have an external investigation. And he has said, I absolutely agree, and he authorized it. And that by the next day, well, by that night and the next day, the AG was on it. So I think he takes this very seriously, and he pledges transparency. That's what I know right now.
I understand that, but
I don't know the answer to your question.
Yeah, but no, the second thing is, and I don't know, is there is this pattern that at a certain level, when people are behaving badly, nothing happens. And then when it becomes public, I'm thinking about a former AD, I'm thinking about people in the athletics department, I'm thinking about these other things that until these things become public, then all of a sudden we go, oh, we're going to be transparent. But we're not transparent unless they're forced to be transparent. Because lots of people had questions about, because to be quite honest, to have someone leave that quickly with that kind of position, that's not a normal circumstance. And
No, it's not.
So the fact that only until things become public. So I guess what I'm asking is, why don't we already have a process in place when things that are unusual happen, that we can get better information about it and that there can be some sort of discussion instead of going, nothing to see here until there's something to see here. So
That is a question I will ask our Attorney General. If you have any other questions, forward them to me, and I will gather them, and we will go forward with it, and I will be as transparent as possible. Okay, Senate business, 30 minutes. Let's see, 5. Are there any additions or changes to today's agenda? Okay. Agenda items, action items. Action item 1, recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the undergraduate major change bulletin number 7, Exhibit I. Casey is here. Any discussion? All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. Recommendation, or action item number 2, recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the undergraduate major change bulletin number 8, Exhibit J, and Casey is here. Any discussion? All in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, please say no. Action item number 3, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the Graduate Change Bulletin number 4, Exhibits K, and Alex and Umesh are here. I'm waving to them on Zoom.
We wave
All in
back.
favor? Okay. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. Discussion items. Recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the undergraduate major change bulletin number 9, Exhibits L and L1. Casey is here. Discussion item 2, recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the UCOR change bulletin number 2, Exhibits M. Exhibit M. Casey is here. Discussion item 3, recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the UCOR change bulletin number 3, Exhibit N. Discussion item 4, recommendation from the Faculty Affairs Committee to amend the faculty manual regarding emeritus faculty appointments, sections 3G, exhibits P, P1, P2. Steve is here. Oh.
Maybe because I'm nearing retirement age, I have a little more interest in the emeritus faculty situation and how it's written up in the faculty manual. I have a question about the exhibit P1, the redlined item. I have a hard time interpreting a statement that has 3 knots in it, NOTs. Emeritus status will not, emeritus faculty will not have privileges accorded to the faculty that are not explicitly granted above, including but not limited to. Could someone help me interpret that?
Can you move the mic down to Steve, please? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't actually write this, but we were asked to put this in because this is actually stated somewhere else in the faculty manual about the voting privileges. It comes up every year for tenure and things. And so we were asked to kind of clarify what the privileges included. And so I think the point was really to put a couple of things off limits. That's why all the knots are there. Is to clarify mostly the voting issues. I admit it's got a lot of knots. Maybe we should revise it somehow.
So I understand it seems like it's about voting, voting for faculty hiring or whatever, but what about things related to, there's a lot of other things that the faculty do that it's voting. You know, it's serving on PhD committees, voting on oral or written comprehensive exams. Is that somehow to be interpreted in the red line? Because this seems like it's related only to voting of the items that are mentioned there. Just curious.
Actually, I had to think about that, but I think not necessarily. I don't know, Laura, do you have any? Could you help me with that one?
I would say that the graduate school rules
Can we
explicitly state that you can do. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, what?
Individual bylaws determine the voting rights of emeritus
Okay. Okay. That wasn't what I was going to say, but in case you didn't hear Judy, the individual bylaws determine the rights of emeritus faculty on committees. And I agree that that could be worded more elegantly. And maybe we need to go back to Jim and think about that. Yeah, there have been several cases this year in particular of emeritus faculty voting on promotion and tenure cases. And that is against the faculty manual. And the faculty manual as it is lays out explicit rights, but it doesn't say the things that can't be done. So maybe we just need to be a little more specific about that.
I want to get out of here by 5 o'clock too, so I'm not going to belabor.
We have a margarita waiting, so yeah, that's two.
The list of items that appear above the red line and thing are emeritus rank shall entail continued campus courtesies, including the options too. But in the redlined section, then it says, it makes reference to those. It says we'll not have privileges according to the faculty that are not explicitly granted above, including, which suggests that those are the things that are granted, and anything else needs to be explicitly granted somewhere. So any other reference to, again, faculty involvement with doctoral student programs and whatever is not on that list, and I don't know where it should appear, but somewhere it needs to be clarified, I think.
I think it's a fair point, and we'll go back and try it again.
Now I can retire.
Okay. Oh, I have some time in front of me. Let's see. That was 4. So we're on to 5. Recommendation from Faculty Affairs Committee to amend the faculty manual on trademarks and royalties, section 4G, patent policy, and 4J trademarks. Exhibits Q, Q1, Q2, and Q3.
Thank you. Dory Main, horticulture and representing plant pathology. So our department feel that we haven't necessarily had enough discussion about this, as we're one of the departments that is affected by this significantly. So when you look at the university the royalties for other components that WSU patent or generate income from, 20% of it goes back to the college, 10%, and of that split, 10% with the department, so 50 each. So in this particular document, it's been like this way for a while, but nothing comes back to the department or to the centre unless the committee decides to do that. So we would like to have a little bit more discussion, at least within our department, and discuss that with the college.
Sorry, we have one mic in this room. Gail, we really got to get him to get a couple of mics. Two handhelds.
That came up in a kind of I think it came up in sort of a different context from some of the other departments. And I think our interpretation was, and I think there's someone from Connors who brought this proposal forward who was supposed to be here to help explain that part of it. But I think our idea was what we thought we would do is this change here, which addresses mostly these specific changes, does not prevent us from going back again and making other changes in the royalties. And so another college raised the same issue as far as the distributions vary depending on whether it's a crop or the nature of the product or the patent. They get distributed different because of those situations, and that's seen as an unfairness on campus. And I think that's a different issue, a related but different issue that we were hoping that we could revisit again at another time. So our idea was to move this through to address the current issue and then go back if there was concerns about it and then raise another issue as far as the distribution of funds. So it has come up. We've talked about it, and I agree with you. It seems like it needs to be a conversation.
Any other discussion? Recommendation, this is number 6, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the Graduate Major Change Bulletin number 5, Exhibits R. Alex and Umesh are here, or there. Discussion item number 7, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the revised plan to MS in experimental psychology. It must be just a revised plan of the MS in experimental psychology, exhibits S and S1. Alex and Umesh are here. Discussion item number 8, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the revised plan to the PhD experimental psychology, or PhD in experimental psychology, exhibits T and T1. Number 9, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the revised plan in the MS in clinical psychology, exhibits U and U1. Discussion item number 10, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the revised plan, the PhD in clinical psychology, exhibits V and V1. Last discussion item, number 11, recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve to create this sentence is to approve to create a MS degree in kinesiology, exhibits W and W1. Alex and Umesh are here. Oh, I thought you had a question. Oh, okay. I was like, okay, that's it. So constituent concerns.
I have a question.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a point of order here. In regard to the discussion item number 4, Senator Muehling brought up an issue with that. I think we need clarification on that. Is that going to get sent back to committee and then come back to the Senate as a discussion item, or will it move on to an action item? Are we all clear on that as a Senate as to what's happening with that?
So as I understood it, Steve explained this as this is a first pass that next cycle would go into the distribution of those funds. I don't know. That's what I heard.
This is about the emeritus faculty position?
Oh, wait, sorry, the emeritus faculty position. I'm all over the place today. The emeritus faculty position.
It's valid for the other.
Thanks.
I think for this one, we will take it back and bring it back as a discussion item, so to make sure we get it right, and there's another opportunity to provide discussion on it. I think for the second one on the trademarks and royalties, what we'd like to do is take that through as is, and then we can go back at another time to revisit that issue, because I think it's separate enough to be addressed in a separate way, if that's okay with the Senate.
Well, somebody has, yes, it is, if that's okay with the Senate, right?
I don't know how this works.
It's going to, okay, what he said.
Can we say that on the mic so people?
Oh, yeah, here. I'll save you, Brian.
Yeah, you could take each one individually and just use unanimous consent. You could ask for discussion item number 4 would operate as Steve suggested, and if there's no objection, then it would work that way. Same thing on the other issue. Does that make sense? Rather than go through the second motion and then vote and all that stuff.
Okay. So are we good?
No, discussion item number 4.
Discussion, yes, I'm sorry. Discussion item number 4. So I'm asking about unanimous consent.
Yeah, is there an objection to
Yes.
Steve's recommendation?
So is there an objection to Steve's recommendation for discussion item number 4?
Okay.
Okay.
Clarify, that recommendation that he comes back again.
Oh, it's turned off.
The recommendation would be that it comes back again as a discussion item.
With some editing.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Yes.
proposing, so to make sure everyone understands that.
Okay.
Okay, and now discussion item number 5. Is that all right for the proposal to carry this one forward as planned and then revise the distribution in a future action?
Right, and that would be my request respectfully, that we take this one forward, and then if there are concerns, it comes back as a secondary one and we address it up fresh. Because I know that this is a time-sensitive issue regarding some patents and trademarks and Connors.
Okay. Unanimous consent?
I see a skeptical look over there.
No objection?
I see no objection.
All right, okay.
We're good.
Now, thank you. This is the parliamentarian. So, constituent concerns. Okay. Oh. Sorry.
You have something? I do. Sorry, I do have and it probably was talked about the last meeting. I got another one today about the parking increases and whatever's happening. About the parking fee increases. I also posted it to the blog, but I got another constituent concern about the fee increases and about the fines for students. So.
Did you post that recently?
Yeah, today.
Oh,
because I got it today, so
okay,
I
I didn't
posted
check
it today.
Yeah, the parking thing has sort of gone off my radar, and I think that what we have to do, and I did look, and the president and regent, I mean, that has to be approved. It can't just be a mandate. So I think what we have to do, we meet with the president and provost next week, next Friday, and I think that's what we'll add that to the agenda item. Any other constituent concerns? Thank you all, and I will be as transparent as possible. See you